Yeah. Okay. Where am I? The 61 and the 62. Breakfast of Champions. Let me start with the 62, this wonderful, magical, delicious gate, the preponderance of the small. We've got two small gates. You remember Taming Power of the Small, ninth gate? All these little details, how wonderful they are, how they all add up to something terrific. The preponderance of the small is concepts packaged as data. I mean, the 62nd gate is a metamorphic gate. It is a gate that translates visual pattern into formulas, and the formulas are words. So everything about the 62nd gate is its ability to be able to express what we call facts. The fact that we call it fact doesn't mean necessarily that the fact is true. You know, it's an expression of data. Let's just call it data, you know. All 62s, you know, their ability to be able to express the data, this is what makes our Maya. So the 62nd gate in a very special way is instrumental in our ability to make the Maya dense. Dense. We live in a very dense Maya. And you can measure the density of the Maya by how many words you know. No, it's true. The density of the Maya is directly related to how many words you know. It is your words that define the illusion of the world. You know? It is your very vocabulary that defines the limitation of your world. It does. It's an interesting thing to think about. And you see, if you don't know a word, you don't know a thing, if you know what I mean. I mean, if you don't know the word, then you don't know the thing. And if you don't know the thing, then it's not in your Maya. And if I know the thing, my Maya's denser than yours. Nah. You know? I got a super dense Maya, folks. You know? But it's such an interesting thing. I mean, I'm a 62. I'm my Earth, my design Earth in the 62. And every once in a while, I just chuckle because I'll hear somebody talking with somebody else about their design crystal, their personality crystal, and all thing. That came through this box, you know. You know, you take a formula and you put it into the Maya, and it becomes something. It's alive, you know. People talk about crystals. I mean, they didn't talk about them before. They talk about them now, you know. And it wasn't like they weren't there before, but then again, if you don't know, they're not there. The Maya is delicious. But everybody's Maya is different in its density. All of that goes back to the 62nd gate. So, you know, there's this gate that is the gate that in that sense articulates the Maya. So when you're looking out at the world and you're looking out through these 62 eyes, it's not so much that you see the facts. You see the density or not. And that's quite different. I mean, after all, the 1762 is about the organization of humanity. You know, it's about the theoretical side of organizing humanity. And looking out through those 62 eyes, you are seeing the way in which the Maya is organized. And one of the things that you get to notice is when more and more of the Maya becomes available. See, you only have pieces of it, folks. I don't want to disappoint you. You know, we are all unique, which means that we all have a unique Maya. Fortunately, we have some commonalities so we can communicate with each other. You know, but you know, my Maya is different than your Maya. Isn't that sweet? We all have different Mayas. We all have different worlds. I mean, it's really so, and you can actually measure it. It's fascinating. I mean, when you think about words, it's really interesting. I don't know the statistics for German, but I do know, for example, in the English language, the English language is very big because it is the basic language of science and technology. So there's about 1.5 million English words that is for science and technology, and there's about 1 million words in the general vocabulary. The average American uses somewhere between 200 and 250 words in their lifetime. The average educated person, that is with a basic university degree, in their lifetime uses 2,000 words out of a 1 million word vocabulary. They say that the general highest level of vocabulary, general level, amongst extremely well-read people and so forth and so on, may be as high as 40,000 words out of 1 million. And in fact, 40,000 words out of 2.5 million words. So you begin to see that the Maya's really big and we're really small. You know, we have our tiny little slice of the Maya. We don't even share the same illusion. It's quite something. And you can tell anytime you have to deal with somebody who has a vocabulary of less than 200 words. You know right away that there are certain things you cannot discuss. You know? There's just no place to go, you know? And then you see how Maya works. I mean, you get to see how it works. You know, if you don't know what a thing is, it's not there, but it can be there for somebody else. It's so funny. It's wonderful. So you look out of those eyes and that's what you see. On the other side, you have the 61, inner truth. You know, the joke is a visual one. If you look at the chop, you'll see that it's, you know, 2 yin lines sandwiched between 2 sets of yang lines. You know, the truth is in form. The truth is breaking through the illusion. You know, this is where the truth is. The other thing that's so interesting about inner truth is that the very first line, and again, first lines are a foundation, so they're the basis upon which things work, that in inner truth, the first line is about occult knowledge, and it's an indication that, you know, the most basic knowledge we need is occult, in the sense that it is not exoteric, that there is this esoteric knowledge that is a necessary quality, that is a necessary attribute for the inner truth that we need to find. Yet at the same time, the 61 process also becomes a scientific one. I mean, there's many different levels of the pursuit of inner truth. But the thing to keep in mind about it is that this is, you know, you're dealing with a head center gate. Now we saw the 64, 63 and the dilemma of this is the deep gray area and it's carrying all this information, the way that works. But when you're dealing with the 61, you have a different kind of phenomena because it is acoustic. It is not visual at all. And one of the dilemmas of the 61 is that it often brings, 1950s radio interference, ears that ring and, whatever the case may be. There's an odd acoustic quality to it. But the dilemma is that there's nothing to look for. See, the 63 and the 64 can look. They can look. And what I mean by that is that because of the way in which their processes operate, they can examine things from an established construct. Logic looks at patterns, the abstract looks at flow, looks at movement. But they're looking. The 63rd gate of doubt is doubtful about a stored pattern. The 64th gate of confusion is confused about a stored sequence. But the 61 doesn't know, and doesn't know why it doesn't know, and doesn't know what it should be knowing if it would know anything so that it could know. It doesn't know. That's a real problem. This can lead to, there's a kind of madness in thinking about what you don't know. I mean, there's a whole thing about knowing. There's things that you can know, and there's things that you cannot know. And it's very difficult for knowers who are not aware to give up on things that they can't know. Yeah. I mean, there are people that say to me, all right, what was there before the Big Bang? I do not know. Well, what do you think was there? I do not know. Doesn't it matter to you? No, it does not. Wouldn't you like to know? No, I'm not interested. I can only know what I can know, and what I can't know, I'm not going to play with because it'll drive me crazy. And there's so many 61s who say, I want to know how that works. You know, and you say to them, well, you're not going to know that. You know, that does not do anything for them. The 61 is really a dilemma. It's a dilemma because there's nothing to base it on. You don't even know if the knowing is ever going to show up anyway. There's no framing for whatever the knowing could be, and yet you feel the pressure. Because the pressure is there. It's there all the time. It's the pressure. So when you look out at the world, and you have 61 eyes, what you see is that nobody really knows anything. And you wonder why. There seems to be so much information around, and nobody seems to know anything. Nobody seems to know what really matters. They don't. You know, this is the whole thing. And there is this sense of, you know, this head pressure. It's very, very confusing for human beings because 70% of humans have an open head center. So, you know, you have this constant thinking about things that do not matter over and over and over and over again. You have so many people who are influenced to think about things that do not matter, to think about things that cannot be known. I mean, cannot be known, you know? Anyway, so you look out in the world and you look out there with your 61, and one of the things that you do see is something that's become very important for us, which is the real basis of our science, is that examine the form. This is the center of inner truth. This is its core. You examine the form. And maybe by looking into the form, we can find the true inner truth. You know, so the assumptions that were made, for example, by, you know, Greeks 3,000 years ago about the way in which this body worked, you know, were very different from, you know, the first scientists to do autopsies, who cut it open and said, oh my God, look at all that. You know, it's like, how does this work and how does that work? And we started to look into the form. Wonderful. Actually began really with the cross of planning. You know, when we entered into the global cycle in 1610, you know, we started to get really organized and very good at this kind of investigation of the form. And of course, you can see that because of the hexagram structure where you always have transpersonal aspects of it, to understand how the transpersonal qualities of the 61 have led to our investigative factories, you know, where we have thousands of scientists looking at things and all this kind of stuff. But it is the inner truth. So, you know, the problem with somebody who's a 61 who cannot be grounded because they are trying to know what is unknowable, you know, the only thing that is healthy for them are those things that are concretized. They have to be able to see the real thing. You know, that is the only way in which knowing is going to work for them. Now, of course, it can be very inspiring on a personal level. You know, anyone who carries a 61, I carry a 61 in my design sun there. I can be very inspiring for all of you in that sense. You know, I can inspire you with the form, inner truth, and all of that stuff. But like anything else that is involved in the personal process, not my transpersonal process, not what my mind is as outer authority, but when my mind was an inner authority in my life, before all this happened to me, that 61 was really an odd thing. You know? It was not very pleasant. in that sense, because I didn't really understand anything about the form. Nothing. Nothing at all. So you look out in the world with your 61 eyes, and you see that to get down to the obvious, displayed reality, get to the basis of things, get to the source of them, go all the way down, get the basic construct, get all of that. That is what has to be done. And of course, what the 61 will see is that it looks out in the world and they say they don't know how to do that. I mean, the 6124 is the channel of the thinker. There is this capacity, in the thinker, to muse and ponder over, how you get to that inner truth.